This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations.
Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
It is Monday, November 18th, 2024. Welcome back to Hang Up and Listen, Slate Sports Podcast. Back with you again. I'm Alex Kirshner. I'm a contributing writer for Slate, and I'm the co-host of the college football podcast Split Zone Duo. I've got my usual wise panel with me this week, and we've got lots to discuss. We will go over the hubbub around Friday night's Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson boxing extravaganza. It was a true monument to American excess. Plus, we've got a resolution, for now, to a cord-cutting crisis that had become particularly acute for Major League Baseball, the NBA, and the NHL, and that will directly affect the way millions of us watch our favorite teams. And finally, we will get into the Kansas City Chiefs, the Buffalo Bills, and a rivalry that the NFL is clearly investing quite a lot into beyond the playoff stakes inherent when these two teams get together. As usual, joining me this week is Lindsay Gibbs. She is the author and the founder of Power Plays, a bi-weekly newsletter that adds key context to the biggest women's sports stories of the moment. She was formerly the co-host of the feminist sports podcast Burn It All Down. She has written for all kinds of outlets, Business Insider, The Athletic, The Ringer, Bleacher Report, USA Today, and many more. And now she is a regular with us on Hang Up and Listen. Lindsay, welcome back after a week away. Did you miss us?
Oh, I missed you so much, but, I hope I remember how to do this. We'll see. Be gentle with me this week.
Operating a podcast can be extremely dangerous if you're not trained and very up to speed on how to do it.
It's like you take a bye week, in the playoffs, and sometimes you come back and you're a little bit more vulnerable.
Also back this week is Ben Lindbergh. He is a senior editor for The Ringer. He's the co-host of the Effectively Wild Baseball podcast, and he's the co-author of The MVP Machine, How Baseball's New Nonconformists Are Using Data to Build Better Players, and the Only Rule Is It Has to Work, our wild experiment building a new kind of baseball team. You might know him from his previous work at 538 or at Grantland, or as the editor-in-chief of Baseball Prospectus, or for correctly predicting that the NBA's onslaught of three-point shooting over the past few seasons might go to new heights this year when we made some preseason predictions a few weeks ago. He says he's no Nostradamus, but folks, is he?
What can I say? I live uptown, but I shoot from downtown. Maybe I make predictions like Larry Nance Jr. and Josh Green shoot threes. I don't heave them up that often, but when I do, nothing but net.
An absolute swish. And of course, I bring that prediction up for a reason, because before we get into our business, as always, we want to thank our Slate Plus members for making this show possible. One way that we'd like to say thank you is with a bonus episode. And this week, we will talk about, you guessed it, the astonishing pace at which three-point shooting is continuing to take over more and more of the National Basketball Association. You can hear that episode right now as long as you are a Slate Plus member. Subscribe by going to Apple Podcasts and clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or you can visit slate.com/hangupplus to get access wherever you listen. When I woke up on Friday morning, I didn't think I was going to do it. I didn't think I was going to sit down and spend about 4 hours of my life watching a boxing exhibition on Netflix organized by the MAGA-loving YouTube star Jake Paul, headlined by a bout between Paul and a 58-year-old previously convicted of rape, had not fought really competitively in 20 years, Mike Tyson. Thought I wasn't going to do it, thought I was above it. Well, I did watch it. So did people in some 60 million households, according to Netflix, and so did more than 70,000 people in Jerry Jones AT&T Stadium. Lindsay, did you watch?
I did, or at least, when Netflix allowed me to, I did. There was a lot of buffering, and I hate myself a little, like you. But in my defense, there was an important women's fight involved. It happened to be on Friday night when I was waiting for hours in the emergency room with my mom for something that turned out not to be an emergency. So I was a little bit desperate for any form of a distraction and also a little peek behind the curtain. We had already said we'd probably talk about it this week, so I felt like it was my duty to watch for the job. But I hated myself a little.
Well, I'm glad that turned out not to be an emergency. It also turned out not to be that great a fight, which was maybe not super surprising either, but still a letdown. I was also going to pause before answering to make a joke about the buffering. It did get better later in the broadcast, especially after the fight became so boring that people stopped streaming. So that's one way to solve that problem. I'm not a person who pays to watch boxing, but I do pay for Netflix. So for me, this fight was quote unquote free, aside from the opportunity cost of all the things that I could have done with that time, which goes for the many millions of us who tuned in, at least to the end of the card.
Yeah, the card itself, if you take an all-encompassing view of it, was actually kind of exciting and educational to non-boxing regulars, which probably includes all three of us. There were some great fights this night. And Jake Paul, in particular, is going to get credit for putting this thing together. There was an incredible fight between Mario Barrios and Abel Ramos for Barrios's WBC welterweight title, which led to a tie in a fight that was as punch-filled as anything I've ever seen when I watch boxing. And the judges literally ruled it a draw, which means that Barrios got to retain his title. And then, Lindsay, you mentioned the excellent women's fight between Katie Taylor of Ireland and Amanda Serrano, a proud Puerto Rican, in a super lightweight title fight, which included Taylor headbutting Serrano once or twice, and a lot of people at home and in the crowd thinking that the decision should have gone to Serrano, but the judges saw it differently, and they gave it to Katie Taylor. I had never seen a women's boxing match get that kind of publicity before, and I guess they picked well, because it was a great bout between Taylor and Serrano.
Yeah, as you might expect, I have a lot of feelings about this. Apparently, nearly 60 million people tuned in, as you mentioned, to watch the Paul versus Tyson, but nearly 50 million households globally apparently did tune in for Serrano versus Taylor. It's likely to be the most watched professional women's sporting event in U.S. history, though I'm not sure how Netflix is counting things and what counts as U.S. ratings versus global ratings. I think there's some finagling there, but we'll just have to see. But notably, it was these two fought at Madison Square Garden headline. They were the first female boxers to headline at Madison Square Garden a couple years ago and had an epic fight. Jake Paul and his agency were behind getting that fight off the ground, too. That was the first $1 million payday in women's boxing history. And this one, it's reported that they both made more than $6 million for this fight. So that's really good money and really important money to be going into women's boxing. And I mean, I think there's still a lot of pearl clutching when it comes to women's boxing, as we're not going to rehash the entire Olympics, but the thought of a woman getting punched in the face seemed to be just horrific to many people. But I think that this showed what the sport can be with investment and with a showcase, which is the truth for most women's sports. The talent is there. And it just needs, the water in order to grow. But I'll pause here for now because I have a lot more thoughts about Jake Paul getting to be the champion for women.
Amplifying women's voices. No one amplified them more back on Friday night than Jake Paul.
You mentioned Mike Tyson's history of domestic violence and rape, and it's important to know that Jake Paul has also been accused of sexual assault. So, we're just throwing that out there.
And it was an exciting fight, and it was a bloody fight. That was a nasty cut above the eye. And then it became a controversial fight with the unanimous 95-94 decision, which...
It was ridiculous. It was just... I don't understand it at all.
It flummoxed me and maybe many other boxing neophytes, especially when you see the tail of the tape, and there's just such a mismatch in terms of total punches thrown, landed, percentage, right? I know obviously the quality of the punches matters too, but it really seemed seemed, and maybe it was just a slow start, I guess you could say, but it was just a strange kind of confounding decision in the end. And I know that there had been people saying like, oh, it's got to be a knockout or else this thing's going to be rigged. I'm always there for conspiracy corner when it comes to boxing because so often there are things that are actually crooked. I can't speak to the specifics here, but there was a lot of bitterness initially after the fight, not permanently, but, there were some good quotes. I enjoyed Serrano's, I knew it was going to be a little shady, but listen, I came here, I chose to be great, right? So, pouring a little fuel on the fire of the conspiracies about somehow this being set up. But it was a great rematch, and I guess it sets the table for maybe a third match between these two after the MSG fight, where they were the headliners and they drew almost 20,000 people just to that, right? So I don't know if we could somehow break down the 60 million or whatever it was households for how many were there for the various fights. I assume it would be heavily Tyson and Paul, but still, we at least got more than our money's worth if we actually spent any money on this fight for everything that came before the headline, the co-main event.
I mean, let's face it, they added legitimacy to this fight, to this entire card. And, I was hearing previews about the fight before, and they were saying, this is the real fight of the night. So I think once again, women's sports being used to kind of booster men's sports in ways that they are falling short, was the case. I do think the rigged, accusations, I'm wondering if this is a bit of a storyline because Serrano is actually managed by Jake Paul's agency. So that puts an interesting twist to it. So I'm kind of like, if it was going to be rigged for anyone in a decision, wouldn't it be rigged for Serrano? Because she was the first client signed to Jake Paul's agency. But, maybe this makes it more intriguing for a rematch.
I do think that you make a good point about who was lifting up who at this event. I think in large part, it is going to be seen as Jake Paul putting women's sports on a platform. And sure, there are definitely way more people who watch this fight, way more people, because it was attached to this Paul Tyson sort of boondoggle that was put together at Jerry World. But it does lend some credence to the whole night that there were a couple of great fights before the complete snoozer, which was more or less elder abuse of Jake Paul just kind of beating down Mike Tyson anticlimactically for 20 minutes in the final bout of the card. We tend to like to talk, and by we, I mean the big royal we, of women's sports as like a charity case. Like, the NBA is helping this hard-scrabble WNBA sort of get off its feet. What a nice thing they're doing in the NBA. And you kind of get a little bit of that here.
Oh, for sure.
Like Jake Paul, I think, would love to be seen as that. But there were two fights in particular. One of them was a fight between men, one between women, that were amazing fights that made me not feel like it was a total loss in my 4 or 5 hours to watch this. And Paul Tyson was not one of those fights. Taylor Serrano absolutely was.
Yeah. If I can just go on a little bit of a rant here, I think Jake Paul is falling into a long line of people we're seeing entering the women's sports space who are seeing the economic opportunity and doing it for selfish reasons that is going to benefit women. But, there is opportunity there because the sport has been so neglected by everybody for so long. So it's an easy in. It's an easy way to make an impact and make a name for yourself that you probably can't get in the men's world. And I do think it's important to talk a little bit of the history of women's boxing here, because if you don't know it, it dates back to the 1700s. It was an exhibition at the 1904 Olympics, but it was illegal for women to box until super recently in most countries. USA Boxing didn't lift its ban on women's boxing until 1993 after a lawsuit. The IBA, International Boxing Association, didn't lift its ban on women's boxing until 1994. It didn't hold its first world championships for women until 2001. It wasn't legal for women to box in England until 1998. And in 1998, the British Boxing Council was still arguing in court that PMS made women too unstable to box. And Cuba didn't lift its ban on women's boxing until the end of 2022, because they were so worried about what happens if you're pregnant, and women in Cuba still have to take periodic pregnancy tests to be allowed to box. So, it was illegal. Just think about this. In our lifetime, and the lifetime probably of most people listening to this podcast, although I'm sure we have some very, very young people, but it was actually illegal for women's boxing to exist in countries. Serrano, for most of her career, has been fighting for $10,000, $15,000 paydays in championship title boxing matches. So somebody was going to come in and realize that this was a space that could use a lot of investment. And Paul, obviously looking to improve his reputation, to find a way to actually get into the industry, he saw this. And I'm not saying that what he's doing isn't helpful, but I'm saying there needs to be a lot more support. The purse for this event, it's going to be about double what all the other women's boxers make combined this year.
Yes, 6 to 8 million each, it seems, for Taylor and Serrano. Some people think that because of the agency connection that you mentioned for Serrano with Paul, that Serrano might have made a little bit more, but
she said that on Twitter that she was making more. So,
yeah, yes, not some people, the principal.
Reports, sources are saying,
source.
Yeah,
lucrative.
Yeah, I guess there's the question of, is boxing back in the wake of this? And that's probably premature, right? Certainly the part of this event that I imagine the most people saw didn't make a convincing case for boxing being back. And the fact that this is the biggest boxing event of the year, and it took a YouTuber and a guy who hadn't fought for 20 years and hadn't fought well for a lot longer than that to bring out those kind of numbers. There are only so many boxers who can command that kind of attention these days, right? And that's not a women's boxing issue specifically, where you have Taylor and Serrano and probably not that many more who have that kind of name recognition. That extends to the men's game as well. It's just something that has sort of receded from view. And Paul versus Tyson, this is a matchup where I wanted both fighters to lose if possible. And in a way, they did, and we all did, really. But they also won financially. Paul said, I'm here to make $40 million and knock out a legend, and he did one of those things. Tyson is rumored to have made about half that. By going the distance, he avoided having to get a tattoo that said, I love Jake Paul, which is also quite a victory for him. But by the end, these guys were getting booed in the arena and figuratively booed online all across the world. So you kind of have to hand it to Paul, I suppose, that he has made this crossover from YouTube celebrity to traditional mainstream celebrity using boxing to do so, which has been kind of a tough transition for a lot of people who got famous the way he did to do. But then there's been this ongoing conversation about, well, how legitimate a fighter he is, right? And I don't think he advanced that conversation very far by taking on a Mike Tyson who clearly was not up to this. And I don't know whether we credit him or not for seemingly going easy on Tyson and not knocking him out when it certainly appeared that he could have, when Tyson just appeared to be gassed after the first round or so. But I don't think either of them really burnished their reputation as fighters here.
He made me feel sorry for Mike Tyson, and I don't like that feeling.
Yep.
That was a weird feeling.
I think the other sort of future-looking state of sports thing here is Netflix's involvement. Netflix has done a few live sports things over the past few years. It did about a year ago a combo platter of F1 drivers and PGA Tour players playing golf in Vegas in an event that did not have anything close to this kind of cultural breakthrough. It's done some live before. It did a live Love is Blind that was also plagued by technical issues that made a lot of people upset.
Including me. Including
1/3 of the show. I do think that from Netflix's perspective, they have become more pro sports in recent years. And there's this famous quote from one of the CEOs of Netflix in the past being asked why they wouldn't get into live sports. He said, we're not anti-sports, we're pro-profit because the rights fees are so prohibitive. Clearly, at this point, Netflix is dropping some of that guard. And the main evidence of that, of course, is that on Christmas Day, the National Football League will be live on Netflix.
And Beyonce. Beyonce
At halftime of a Texans-Ravens game. And there will also be what looks like it's going to be a huge Chiefs-Steelers game for possibly the top spot in the AFC playoffs on Christmas Day on Netflix. I think we can intuit that Netflix probably, to some extent, no matter how big Jake Paul is, saw him as a warm-up, technically speaking, for what they have coming on Christmas Day. Because if Netflix has streaming problems like this on Christmas Day, Roger Goodell might have Netflix executives extradited to a country with no bans on torture or anything like that. The punishment will be swift and it will be brutal if Netflix repeats that with the National Football League on Christmas.
And not just that, but their whole broadcast was very chaotic. And there was a lot of audio problems, like in the booth. And there was one segment where one of their guests, like the mic wasn't working the whole time.
Yeah, Jerry Jones. Honestly, it was kind of nice. You couldn't hear him.
No, there was one before that even where I can't really remember which boxing legend it was. I'm sorry. It's been a long week. And then, you had Jerry Jones, though. Come on. It took place in Jerry World in the Cowboys Stadium. Cowboys cheerleaders were everywhere. And Jerry Jones goes on, and once his mic unfortunately was turned on, he said, he gave a big thanks to Netflix and talked about how excited he is about this relationship between the Netflix and the NFL. And it just seemed all very, we're all being played here a little bit. I
will say that Jerry was built to promote. And when Jerry was talking about how, Mike's a different guy when he walks into the ring, he's not Mike no more. I was thinking, wow, like this guy was built to do this. He was absolutely go for it.
There's probably no event that is more Jerry Jones than a Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson title fight on Netflix. Like Jerry Jones had to be involved in that.
Yeah, when it comes to keeping up with the Joneses on mic here, I definitely give the decision to Jerry over Roy Jones Jr., who somewhere is still saying that he doesn't like Tyson's legs, even though he's no longer on mic, or talking about what the glove biting meant for Tyson's mouth guard. That was a fun little debate that was repeated many times throughout the production. So it was pretty amateurish on the whole, and maybe they worked the kinks out and they'll be better from now on. But yeah, there's a lot at stake here. It's like we talked about last week with the NFL going global and what are its ambitions. At some point, if you have conquered your market, you have to open up new markets. And Netflix is the dominant streamer, but live sports are extremely popular. We're going to get into that in our next segment, right? As live sports move off of their traditional platforms to streaming, Netflix is going to want a piece of that. You want to get those live eyeballs so that you can actually run ads and not just rely on subscription fees and people on certain tiers. And we've seen how successful that could be for football with Peacock, with Prime Video. Yes, initially maybe people are pissed that they have to download some streamer or sign up for something that they don't already get to access those games, but many millions of people have done that, and some of them stay on board. So it's not just the NFL, it's also Raw, right? Netflix has invested heavily in wrestling. They're going to be live streaming Raw, which is not this size audience, but is still considerable. So there's a lot at stake here, and I think it is a sign of the future, hopefully with fewer assless chaps.
Oh my gosh. And I am glad it already features one of my favorite sports, which is Love is Blind, obviously. So I already pay for it for that. So more events being added to things I already pay for and don't have to pay extra for, I'm a fan.
Yeah. I also took away from this that we really need to just move on from the nostalgia reboot culture of bringing back a past his sell date Mike Tyson and everyone reminiscing about when they watched him in the 80s. I get that maybe that works if you reboot Beverly Hills Cop the way that Netflix did with Axel F., which was a big streaming hit for them, but doesn't work so well when you're talking about a human being who is mortal and ages quite quickly in a combat sport. And so our entire culture just being based on reboots and sequels and Beetlejuice and Beverly Hills Cop and Twisters. Granted, Twisters was fun. Ghostbusters, Top Gun, Mad Max. We have no new ideas. We are entirely reliant on things that were hits before when there was a monoculture that actually have some name recognition because people know who Mike Tyson is. You know, when Rosie Perez was saying you have to respect Mike Tyson, well, not necessarily.
Yeah.
But when everyone was describing him as an icon, yeah, that's pretty tough to argue because a boxer back then, as big as he was, is bigger than any boxer can be now. And so it seems as if we're just sort of stuck in this endless cycle of bringing back things that were big decades ago.
Mike Tyson does still cut an intimidating profile until he actually got in the ring.
Yes.
I did hear from somebody who told me that if Mike Tyson were dead and in an urn, they would not fight the urn, which I thought was a reasonable way to think of Mike Tyson, though maybe not now that we have seen what it looks like when Mike Tyson is 58 years old.
I mean, he was injured and he tweeted that he had blood transfusion and was on his deathbed in the summer. Like, this was not a smart decision.
It was one of those classic athlete moves of not making any excuses, but also I'm severely injured and almost died. So you can kind of have it both ways. But I mean, he certainly got in good shape for a 58-year-old. Like, he looked great. Pretty imposing. Yeah, it's just that he wasn't moving well.
We saw so much of him.
We certainly, he bore it all.
Much of him.
Yes, he did. So people were showing these, cut together clips from practice where he looked like his 80s self again. And you just don't know whether that's because he hurt himself after that or because you can do that for 30 seconds in practice, but not actually do it for 8 rounds.
It's the Ben Simmons summer workout special.
Right.
The mid-range jumper was really coming along for Mike Tyson. You just didn't get to see it. That is our talk about Netflix, boxing, and a new way to watch sports. Next, we will talk about an old way that apparently isn't quite dead yet, and we'll talk about that most exciting of topics, bankruptcy court. But we'll do it in a way that doesn't make you fall asleep as you listen to this podcast.
Whether you're ordering wings for the game, whipping up a 7-layer dip, or ordering pizza, there's something about football that makes you want to eat. And this football season, Uber Eats has the best deals on game day food. No matter what you're craving, from 2-for-1 pizza to buy one, get one wings, Uber Eats will be dropping new deals each week, all season long. Uber Eats, official on-demand delivery partner of the NFL. Order now. Terms and conditions apply. See app for details.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. This month is all about gratitude, but here's one person we don't thank enough: ourselves. It's sometimes hard to remind ourselves that we're trying our best to make sense of everything, and in this world, that isn't easy. Practicing gratitude can improve your personal well-being, and you might find it beneficial to learn gratitude-building techniques from a therapist. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp can help you tackle life's challenges by providing accessible and affordable care. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. With BetterHelp, you can message a professional therapist anytime, anywhere. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. If something's interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals, they may be able to help. Let the gratitude flow with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/hangup today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/hangup. Back here on Hang Up with Ben Lindbergh and Lindsay Gibbs, I'm Alex Kirshner. You've probably read a few stories in the past 2 or 3 years about the headwinds facing regional sports networks. Those are the local channels on which your favorite baseball, basketball, or hockey team probably plays its games. And frankly, if you are like me, you have probably wished for a powerful psychedelic to help you cope with the boredom that you feel when reading these stories. This is a sports business story about bankruptcy and reorganizing and cord cutting. It's important, though. If you were a fan of the San Diego Padres in the summer of 2023, one day came about and you just could not watch your favorite team anymore on the channel that you had been watching them on for many years because of these business machinations behind the scenes. A lot of these regional sports networks have been in a ton of trouble, in particular, Ben, the ones owned by Sinclair Broadcasting Group under a holding company called Diamond Sports Group. Those are the channels that for the past few years have been called the Bally Sports Networks. Now they're going to be named after FanDuel. There are 16 of them. They have the rights for 13 NBA teams, 8 NHL teams, and 6 Major League Baseball teams. And they also, against some odds, still exist, having emerged from bankruptcy intact in the past week after some doomsdaying about possibly these channels going away altogether and the entire way that we watch sports, at least watch baseball, basketball, hockey, changing overnight. Does this mean, Ben, that the TV problems for professional sports with regional sports networks are soothed?
Definitely not. It does mean some of the short-term uncertainty is soothed, but the medium to long-term existential threat is still there. Diamond is not down the drain, but I'd say it's still circling it, as is the whole RSN era that really sports have been built on essentially since the days that Mike Tyson was actually the best fighter in boxing. So I'm with you on this being the most important, boring story in sports, because every time you hear about a bankruptcy hearing, my eyes glaze over. And yet I have to remind myself, this is actually going to be felt on the field and soon and in some extremely significant ways. And even though some of the immediate crisis has been averted, you have fewer teams twisting in the wind and they have re-upped with Diamond, they're still getting less money from Diamond than they originally agreed to get. And the teams that have left Diamond, MLB is now managing the broadcasts of at least 7 teams, they're getting less money than they initially contracted to receive as well. So you almost have to bring it back to the Moneyball, seeing, what is the problem? And the problem here is that we're moving away from a model where sports were subsidized, where because of cable, you had many, many millions of people who were not actually signing up to watch the sports, who were paying for the sports anyway, so that the broadcasters and by extension the teams and by extension the players were reaping the rewards of those people who were kind of passively kicking into the sports fund without actually electing to do so. And to bring back another Moneyball line, you can't really recreate the audience in the aggregate. Direct to consumer, even if you do tap out that market and max out that market, you still most likely will end up with fewer people and less revenue than you had before. And that's going to cause a reckoning.
Most acutely, we've already seen this with the Padres, for instance, where the Padres were making something in the many tens of millions of dollars when they had their regional sports network deal. Lindsay's favorite team, the San Diego Padres. So I know this will really hurt you.
Oh, yeah.
And
of course. How
then
could I forget?
they wind up launching a direct-to-consumer streaming product, which on the one hand is great because if you're a Padres fan and you didn't feel like getting Bravo or whatever and you just wanted to watch Fernando Tatis play baseball, congratulations, you have that available to you now. And you can pay some small monthly amount to watch the Padres. But for the Padres, I mean, the math is obvious, Ben, and you allude to it, that they were making many tens of millions of dollars before, and now people have done the napkin math, and it's perhaps as low as 8 figures that they're making on this direct-to-consumer product.
Yeah. It's hard to say exactly. I'm sure there's some ad revenue in there as well, but that is disconcerting because the Padres are a pretty hot ticket, right? They're one of the only shows in town, professional sports-wise, in San Diego these days, and they're a good draw. They've been a good team. They've been an exciting team. They have invested in their roster, so they're exactly the sort of team that you'd think could make a case to their local fan base, hey, sign up to watch our games. And they did, and yet it just doesn't amount to really more than a fraction of what they were presumably getting before. So the crisis isn't really, are we going to be able to watch these games? That, I think, is pretty assured that you're going to get to watch them somewhere. And in fact, you might be able to watch them in more convenient ways than you could before, depending on how some of these things shake out. It's just, what is the revenue going to look like? And maybe a fan will say, well, what do I care? How does that affect me? If I still get to go to the game, I still get to tune in. Maybe there are fewer blackouts. Maybe I can watch via streamer. Maybe this will actually cost me less money. But in costing you less money, that means the team is going to get less money. And whether or not you care about that, that means maybe ultimately the players are going to get less money, or at least owners are certainly going to try to make sure that's the case. And eventually you're going to end up with some sort of showdown here, right? Something's got to give. And there could be labor battles over this destabilization of how the economic model for sports has worked for decades now.
One of the interesting things about this at the current moment of sports and sports business is that the sports leagues that you might see as growth properties right now, and Lindsay, this absolutely includes maybe the classic example being the WNBA, in a way sort of missed this party of 30, 40 years of this gravy train of these payouts coming from the cable bundle and sports being subsidized. On the other hand, maybe you're fortunate. I know a number of WNBA teams are on these regional sports networks, by the way, but maybe as you are the W and you go into a CBA renegotiation that is starting to unfold right now, and you go into your next round of media rights deals that you expect to be a lot more lucrative, maybe it's good that you don't have to put yourself on this model that you're clearly going to have to be weaned off of the way that baseball is having to be weaned off of it right now. Maybe you grow more sustainably than Major League Baseball's teams are turned out to have been able to do.
For sure. I mean, the narrative is always, the women's sports are charity, whereas like men's sports have been receiving these subsidies through these television contracts and through stadium deals for so long. And we never think about that as, charity in any way. But I do think that women's sports are in a more nimble position, although I am frustrated that none of the reporting so far has revealed how this will impact the WNBA teams that are still with the FanDuel, I guess, sports network or whatever they're calling it. And that includes the Indiana Fever. So I'm sure there will be a lot of interest with that. But, are they continuing? All the reporting was just on what MLB, NHL, and NBA teams are still with them. So, we're kind of going to have to see the layers as they come out of this. But, the NWSL, we've seen go to their own streaming service of the NWSL Plus, which, they're producing all of their own games and kind of eschewing a local, going and trying to rely on these RSNs. And I'm really curious what the WNBA is going to do for these local games and local broadcasts going forward. But I do think that there is a benefit into not being so reliant on a system that is failing. Like, I think you get to be fading. Thank you.
Probably not dying, but I mean, absolutely fading, and best days behind it.
Yeah. And so you get to be a little bit more nimble. You get to be a little bit more creative. And, what I always stress with women's sports is there are blueprints that men's sports have set out, but that does not mean you have to stick to them exactly. Like, let's customize things as we go. Let's learn from mistakes and let's build, try new things and go to new areas. So I'm curious to follow a lot of things. I mean, I know that the Phoenix Mercury, along with the Suns, they, when their billionaire owner came in, they withdrew from these RSNs and kind of were going their own way. I know like the Jazz have the Utah Jazz Plus or something for $20 a month. Like, there's a lot of interesting things out there. I'm curious to see what these teams do.
I think, Ben, maybe the most interesting one is that for the first time ever outside of like pay-per-view boxing, for example, and combat sports, you're essentially going to be able to have pay-per-view single sporting events in at least basketball, hockey, and maybe baseball, though my understanding, and this is based on reporting from Sportico, is that baseball's contractual arrangements are a little bit more convoluted, so it's not clear if you'll be able to buy if you'll be able to buy a single baseball game. But if you're a Detroit Pistons fan, still, number one, credit to you for somehow still being a Pistons fan. And two, if you want to buy one Pistons game to watch on your computer, you can do that. And that's going to be priced at about $7 a pop. I know people who would pay that in the right circumstances. They just want to watch one game. Nice bit of customization that has never been available to sports fans before.
Yeah. And, of course, teams in their local games have done variable pricing depending on what the demand for a certain game is. But I wonder, in a sport with a lot of inventory, which has been baseball's big selling point, there are just a zillion games, and the NBA to a certain extent too, how does that affect things like load management? Do you actually want to bench someone if it means, you're selling not just tickets for that game, but also tickets for people at home, whether they're actually going to watch that game or not? Does that mean no one gets a day off anymore? anymore because you constantly have to just drum up interest in every single game. And if you find that there is a lot of variation in the interest, does that then drive movements to cut down on the length of the regular seasons in MLB and in the NBA? Or do you have the opposite impulse saying, actually, even if we're making less per game, we need to play more games, if anything? We can't afford to slash any games off the schedule because we're losing revenue as it is relative to the old system. So there's going to be a squeeze there. And I wonder also whether this will be eventually reflected in franchise valuations. And, the broadcast deals or the local broadcast deals, I think, make up something like 20% of the revenue in baseball. Maybe there's plenty of other revenue sources, but still, that's a big chunk that until now you've been able to count on for decades, just constantly escalating. Will we see at some point that the franchise valuations do not continue to skyrocket as well? The Minnesota Twins, one of the former Diamond teams that now will have its broadcast managed by MLB, are currently up for sale. So that will be an interesting little data point as we see whether this will continue to be an incredible investment as owning sports franchises has been for so long.
Maybe can this all do away with the blackouts? Which is one of the most frustrating things as a sports fan. I mean, I am in a place where I am, what was Bali, and now I don't know, but I was, kind of right in between. I could get both Bally South or Bally Southeast, and Atlanta Dream Games would technically be on there, even though I'm 6 hours away from Atlanta, and actually closer to DC, but because of the Braves, we get looped in with a lot of Atlanta stuff. But often the local Greensboro affiliate would choose to show like a Cleveland or an Ohio baseball game instead, and I couldn't get it on anywhere else because of the blackouts, because I was technically in region, even though, again, I am not in Georgia.
Obnoxious.
Yeah, MLB's been notorious for that. Of course, the poor Iowans who were blacked out of everything. It's something that they hope to actually rectify, that this will be the way to do that. And some of those teams that have had their broadcasts assumed by MLB have been available without the blackouts. And long term, MLB's goal here is to collect enough of the rights that they can put them together in some sort of national package for half the teams or even all of the teams, and then sell that. And yes, it would be more accessible in theory. And there's been this whole debate for the past couple of years as the games have gotten more fragmented, as MLB, for instance, has been on all sorts of different streaming services. And if you want to watch all of one team's games, you're constantly hopping around and downloading apps. And if you have an older audience, as MLB has historically, maybe they aren't used to watching TV that way. And so there's a little bit of a barrier to entry. Then again, I guess it's also future-proofing you because things are heading that way. But there's going to be some sort of rubber meets the road moment here because the differences between the haves and the have-nots are going to be exacerbated by this. Because the teams that have the big markets, the big media markets, and can afford to do the direct-to-consumer approach and actually sell lots of subscriptions, they're going to weather this storm a bit better. Some of them own their own RSNs as well. And so there's going to be a big imbalance here. And it's not just going to be owners versus players, owners crying poor and saying, hey, we're getting less revenue, therefore you have to take a pay cut. It's going to be the big market owners versus the small market owners, especially in a sport like baseball, where you don't have a salary cap, but you have a lot of revenue sharing. There's going to be a big dispute there because Manfred, MLB, would love to have everyone's packages and rights unified. And the Yankees and the Dodgers, I mean, maybe they'll be receptive to it. Some teams won't, though. They're going to say the gravy train is still rolling for us, more or less. So why should we sacrifice for the betterment of our competitors or the sport as a whole? So that's going to be a big issue. And also, I think the discoverability. Alex, in our bonus segment last week, we talked about MLS and its streaming deal with Apple and the fact that that has worked out for them revenue-wise, maybe, but in terms of just, promotion and marketing and stumbling across MLS games, if everything is paywalled, you're not going to have people just casually channel changing and coming across your sport and becoming a fan. So then maybe are you sort of relying on the diehards to milk them for all they're worth and having a hard time finding new fans? Because, cable, even as people are cutting the cord, it's still about as big as streaming in terms of the number of eyeballs it can command. I'm part of the problem, quote unquote. After being a holdout for a while with cable, I've gone to the YouTube TV family sharing plan, right? So I see the virtues of this, but also there is still a big cable audience out there that you're losing if you go all streaming.
And I got to say, the Diamond, or whatever we're calling them these days, got lucky with a judge who really seemed to appreciate that. Very romantic about the current system, I should say. One of his quotes was, "There's going to be somebody who's going to turn on their television and be able to watch the Detroit Tigers. And that's really important. It sounds not important, but it's important if you have had a stressful day and you want to root for your team and go home and enjoy the game with family. And hardcore fans are hardcore fans, and they want to see their teams play, and rooting for it is just as much a part of the American experience as anything else." I mean, that is just one of the most intense quotes I've heard from a judge.
How can you not be romantic about baseball broadcasts? I'm Mr. Moneyball reference in this segment, but really,
ridiculous.
The Tigers were exciting this season, but boy.
And on that note, the Diamond was able to, thanks to this judge, go from $8 billion in debt to about $200 million in debt.
Must be nice.
What a system we have in this country. The welfare
Makes me want to
state.
declare bankruptcy. I've been missing out.
You can just yell bankruptcy in a loud pitch, and of course, then you've declared it. You don't even have to file for it. They'll just give it to you.
Can this get me out of my mortgage? I'm interested.
As long as the judge can watch the Detroit Tigers.
Up next, the Buffalo Bills and the Kansas City Chiefs continue to headline the NFL, on the field certainly, and in the league's promotion of itself, which has become extremely Billsy and Chiefsy. We'll talk about it. This episode is brought to you by Public.com. Interest rates have fallen, but you can still lock in a 6% or higher yield with a bond account at Public.com. That's a pretty big deal, because when rates drop, so can the interest you earn on your investment. A bond account allows you to lock in a 6% or higher yield with a diversified portfolio of high yield and investment-grade corporate bonds. So while other people are watching their return shrink, you could be earning regular interest payments. But the yield is not locked in until you invest, so check it out. The good news is it only takes a couple of minutes to sign up at Public.com. Lock in a 6% or higher yield with a bond account only at Public.com/hangup. Brought to you by Public Investing, member FINRA plus SIPC. As of September 26, 2024, the average annualized yield to worst across the bond account is greater than 6%. Yield to worst is not guaranteed, not an investment recommendation. All investing involves risk. Visit Public.com/disclosure/bond-account for more info.
If there's one thing sports fans love as much as watching games, it's talking about them, especially the stats. Here's one that's super simple to remember. Discover automatically doubles the cash back earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cash Back Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back to $300. That's right. You could put it towards some memorabilia you've had your eye on, or treat yourself to a premium sports network. You earn and Discover doubles. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
With my friends Lindsay Gibbs and Ben Lindbergh, I'm Alex Kirshner, still with you on Hang Up and Listen. The NFL, for a lot of its history, has had a rivalry to define it. Cowboys 49ers, Packers Bears, Manning Brady, occasionally even Steelers Ravens. Clearly the new sheriff in town, it's not really even new anymore, it's been there for a few years, is Bills Chiefs. The Bills ended a bid for an undefeated Kansas City season yesterday in Orchard Park. That's a big lift for Buffalo, though of course this series has followed a pattern where the Bills win in the regular season and then Patrick Mahomes comes back and beats Josh Allen's team in the playoffs. Everyone will expect that these two teams will see each other again in January, and we will see if they're right. Even Josh Allen acknowledged the likelihood of that afterward, though he cautioned we have to get there first. You could not keep CBS, whether it was their sideline reporter Tracy Wolfson or Jim Nantz, the play-by-play legend, from bringing up this possibility immediately after the game and numerous times during the game. This can't happen for months yet, but clearly the NFL's one of its top broadcast partners wants the season to be seen as the march towards the Bills and the Chiefs playing again, which I understand because there have been some great games between those teams. And that's what's more interesting to me, is that the NFL seems to have realized, and its broadcast partner seems to have realized, that the way to sell the sport right now above anything else, and the NFL doesn't need a lot of help, is to build it around a rivalry, because there has not really been a mano-a-mano like this since the heyday of Peyton Manning and Tom Brady. And that heyday where those two teams were competing with each other, whether it was Brady's Patriots and Manning's Broncos, or for a longer time, Brady's Patriots and Manning's Colts. It's been a long time. The NFL seems extremely excited to have something again that it can really blow up. CBS brought its pregame show, the NFL Today, live to Buffalo for this game, something that they only do for the conference championship game, typically. And really clearly, Ben wanted to make this feel big. Did they succeed?
I'd say so. I like a late blooming rivalry. These are two original AFL franchises that date back to 1960, but if you'd brought up the Bills-Chiefs rivalry even 5 years ago, people probably would have looked at you funny. It was like the Matt Castle classic at that point, but now it's legitimate, right? I mean, with the Bills in the East and the Chiefs in the West, they haven't matched up that often historically. I think 56 times in 65 seasons, including the playoffs. Half of their 6 playoff matchups have come in the past 4 years, but that alone has made this a legitimate rivalry, as well as, of course, the star power of Mahomes and Allen. So I don't feel like they're selling me something here that is entirely manufactured in a broadcast meeting. This is, I think, a legitimate rivalry that has arisen out of the actual circumstances, out of the fact that you have the Chiefs just crushing the Bills' dreams repeatedly in the playoffs, while the Bills have beaten the Chiefs pretty consistently in the regular season. There's just already a lot of recent history here, but it feels pretty meaningful. And yeah, this sort of felt like a warm-up for what's to come, but it was a good game in its own right.
Lindsay, I'm curious from your perspective. Do you feel like a rivalry framing gets you more excited to watch the NFL, like the Chiefs and Bills being at the top of the league? Or are you in the, I'm guessing, minority of people, because people vote with their clickers in a real way, that would rather see a little bit less of this? I guess it's nice because they don't play in the same division. So you don't do, it's not the NFC situation where you see it several times a year and where the quality has not been good.
Yeah, I think that the NFL does mid-tier rivalries really well because of the way their divisions are split up, and the fact that they have so few games and you're facing your division opponents multiple times a year. That does create a Steelers-Ravens, for example, which we also saw this Sunday, that also always gets like a lot of hype. But I think the best thing about this Chiefs-Bills is just how kind of organically it came about. I mean, one of the best sports watching experiences I've had in the past few years was that 2021 AFC divisional playoff game, the 13 seconds game between the Chiefs, when the Chiefs defeated the Bills 42-36. I mean, I was in Portland. I was there doing a live podcast at a MLS supporters group conference. And so I was with a bunch of soccer people, and we were at a bar, and we were kind of, we had the game on in the background, but nobody was like, none of us were diehard Bills or Chiefs fans. It was just kind of on in the background. But we were sports fans, and all of a sudden, like, it got towards the end of the game. And I mean, the game had 4 lead changes and 25 points scored in the final 2 minutes of regulation, and then ended up changing the overtime rules. And I mean, I remember just being, all of us, just like the entire bar, just all cheering for everything, just in awe, standing up, just completely wrapped in, by this game and by these two quarterbacks, by Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. And it just felt so special. And it's so cool that we get to keep watching it year after year. Yeah, I love it. I was tuned in yesterday afternoon. Like, honestly, I haven't been tuned into a non-Panthers and very few Panthers game all season. So it's it's fun. And it's fun because nobody had to tell me to care about it, because by watching that 2021 game, it was so special. I automatically am going to care about all the future matchups.
And even though Allen tried to downplay it and dismiss it as just another Week 11 game, you could tell that he cared and Mahomes cares, and they've been asked to talk about each other, of course, but they've also talked to each other in a way that shows, I think, that they appreciate this rivalry. It's fun for them as well. There was a little light scuffling and brawling in this game, too, which is always fun when no one gets seriously hurt. You know, the sort of bad blood that we see between the Padres and the Dodgers, for instance, when two teams are going head to head and are playing each other often. And there are just a lot of storylines and narratives here. And, you know, Buffalo gets the win, gets the tiebreaker potentially in an AFC championship game. They've never won a Super Bowl. Meanwhile, you have the Chiefs going for the three-peat, and they've broken the Bills' heart a few times, right? And also the fact that it's been even in a sense, not really when it's counted, but the Mahomes-Allen rivalry, they're now 4-4 against each other, including the playoffs, with 2 points separating the two teams in those games cumulatively. So overall, these have been pretty competitive matchups. And I mean, the Manning-Brady comp is not out of line here, I think. I saw a stat that they have actually matched up now 8 times in a 5-year span, and they're only the second pair of quarterbacks to do that, Mahomes and Allen, from 2020 till now. Brady and Manning did that also from 2003 to 2007. And I was looking to see if they do meet again in the playoffs this year, that would be the 9th matchup. And when Manning and Brady had their 9th matchup, which was the 2006 AFC Championship game, they were 30 and 29 years old, respectively. Mahomes now and Allen are 28 and 28. 29 and 28, respectively. So they're actually kind of matching up. You know, will the rest of their careers play out the way that Manning's and Brady's did? Who knows? But between all of that, between the fact that the Bills ended the Chiefs' 15-game winning streak, yes, the 9-0 record was a little bit of a mirage, a high-wire act for a 9-0 team. They certainly seemed vulnerable and had a ton of comebacks, but the fact that it was the Bills that handed them their first loss, all of this really enhances all of these storylines that made us want to watch.
One of the benefits of the NFL, like I said, is it's such a condensed season, although unfortunately it's 17 games now, which is stupid. But it means that there's stakes for every time these teams play if they're good, right? The regular season games matter because seeding matters in the playoffs, and home field advantage really matters. So rivalries in other sports, I feel like there's, you know, I mean, only the diehards are going to get into the Yankees, Red Sox, you know, middle of June games, I think, right? Like, it doesn't hold the same weight unless it's in the postseason, I think, for the general public. I could be wrong. Don't come at me. But it just seems like, just like with Manning and Brady, that every time these teams face, it feels like it's a must-win for someone.
Yeah, and it might prove more fleeting than something like Yankees-Red Sox, which just has decades and decades of history, more than a century at this point. If Allen and Mahomes move on, will people still care about the Bills-Chiefs rivalry? I don't know.
No.
Right. But while it lasts, it's pretty special. Another Allen-Mahomes stat I meant to mention, Allen has the most wins of any QB against Mahomes now. Mahomes is tied with Brady for the most wins against Allen. So they are each other's nemesis in a sense, but in kind of a good-natured way, weirdly. And Allen has even been pretty effective in the Bills' playoff losses. So even if Mahomes has outplayed him in those games, it's not like Allen choked. And I would say it's not just Mahomes and Allen, though that's certainly the majority of it. There's also like the Andy Reid, Sean McDermott history here. And also there's some of the off the field stuff, right? Some significant transactions that involve these two teams. Famously, the Chiefs traded up with the Bills to get the pick they used to draft Mahomes in 2017. And then there was the competition to trade up for Trent McDuffie in the 2022 draft. And then the trade up in the last draft that landed Xavier Worthy Worthy in KC and Keon Coleman in Buffalo. So these teams have kind of gone toe-to-toe, but also matched up and collaborated at times, even off the field, in a way that has sort of set up the on-field matchup.
Well, and they're both involved in two of the biggest kind of off-court NFL stories, right? I mean, DeMar Hamlin, of course, with the Bills. I mean, and then the Kelsey and Taylor Swift of it all. I'm not comparing those two, but I'm just saying, like, these teams are relevant, very relevant individually.
Not comparing them, but both life and death to certain people. DeMar Hamlin's situation and Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce.
Yeah. And they have the two oldest non-Bears or Packers stadiums. So I guess there's that history. I'm just making up other things that can sort of juice this rivalry at this point.
And both teams, honestly, the area where the Chiefs are not as successful as the Bills is that the Bills have successfully convinced the governments of their locality and the state of New York to give them tons of money for a new stadium. The Chiefs are still trying to get taxpayers in Missouri to help them with renovations to Arrowhead Stadium because the Hunt family just really needs it. It's just a really tough time right now for them.
Point Pagulas.
I would say these are two of the three teams that are clearly Super Bowl caliber in the NFL right now. So it also doesn't feel that juiced in that way. Like, it doesn't feel like the league is throwing other teams down the pecking order of things that they would talk about. Really, only the Detroit Lions, I think, are the other team right now that is obviously Super Bowl caliber. But it will be interesting. The AFC playoff race has Pittsburgh at 8-2, my hometown Steelers, in the race to maybe contend with these teams. I mean, by the standings right now, they're right there with them to contend for the first round bye in the AFC. And the NFC story is interesting as well, though it's gotten less attention this year because there's only one really good team. But the Philadelphia Eagles, who were seemingly not that far away from firing their coach a few weeks ago, have gotten hot. They look like a possible Super Bowl contender. You have the Minnesota Vikings looking maybe like a serious contender, despite their quarterback being Sam Darnold. It's Renaissance man Sam Darnold. So right now, it's also a ripe time for the Bills-Chiefs thing to be so hot because there are some good storylines around the league, but like I'm kind of reaching. Like I'm talking about get excited about the Sam Darnold Minnesota Vikings, or could the Steelers perhaps get the number one seed in the AFC? Probably not. It's like these are the two best teams in the conference, and so sure, like you can give me as much of this as you gave me of ESPN giving me or Fox giving me the Yankees and the Red Sox in 2004. That's fine. I have no problem with that. Everyone loves a deal, but no one wants to jump through hoops just to save a few bucks. Turns out it really is easy to get wireless for $15 a month with the purchase of a 3-month Mint Mobile plan. Even Slate's president, Charlie Kammerer, is using Mint Mobile. And he thinks the Mint Mobile deal is amazing. He's on the $15 a month deal and is actually getting unlimited talk and text over their 5G network at literally a fraction of what he was paying with someone else. They let him use his existing phone and he didn't even have to change his number. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. You can use your own phone with any plan and bring your phone number along with all your contacts. Right now, all 3-month plans are $15 a month, including the unlimited plan. To get started, go to mintmobile.com/hangup. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/hangup. That's mintmobile.com/hangup. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/hangup. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to just $15 a month. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details.
It is time for Afterballs. Well, we've talked about the Chiefs, who somehow started 9-0 before losing on Sunday. We've seen some impressive starts in the NBA and NHL also, the latter of which will be relevant to today's Afterball. But in the NBA, the Cleveland Cavs are 15-0, trailing only the 2015 and 2016 Warriors for the longest win streak to start an NBA season. The Winnipeg Jets got off to a 15-1 start, making them the first team in NHL history to win 15 of their first 16 games. They've lost their last 2 games to fall to 15-3, and so they've fallen behind the 2 teams in NHL history that won 16 of their first 18 games. And they are both Boston Bruins teams, the 2022-23 team and the 1929-30 team. Both of those Bruins teams featured named lines, which I love. The tradition of giving a name to a unit of 3 forwards dates back to the inaugural 1917-18 NHL season when the Montreal Canadiens trio of Didier Petre, Jacques Laviolette, and Nuzi Lalonde were dubbed the Flying Frenchman line. The 2022-23 Bruins were the last ride of the so-called Perfection line of Patrice Bergeron, David Pastrnak, and Brad Marchand. But you may not remember the 1929-1930 team line, which set a record, that team that still stands for the best winning percentage in an NHL season. In goal, that team had Hall of Famer Tiny Thompson, who was 5'10", and was named Tiny ironically, because people were not that big back then. But on offense, it was powered by Hall of Famers Cooney Weiland and Dit Clapper, who combined with fellow forward Dutch Gaynor to form the Dynamite line. Alex, what's your Dynamite line?
Ben, what a tremendous introduction. My Dynamite line this week, it is the Winnipeg Jets. When version 2.0 of the Winnipeg Jets arrived in Manitoba in 2011, it felt like justice. Manitobans love hockey. They had a highly competitive NHL team to root for in the 1980s and 90s. The Jets were regular participants in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and they had some great players. Hockey fans of a certain age will remember the lightning-fast Dale Hawerchuk, who won the Calder Trophy as Rookie of the Year with 45 goals in 1982 and spent 9 years as a Jet, or maybe Paul McLean, the right winger who had a trio of 40-goal seasons for the franchise around that same time. But it didn't end well. Winnipeg, then as now, was the league's smallest media market with a metro area of well under 1 million people. Ownership moved the Jets to Arizona in 1996. That was part of a strategy to look for non-traditional hockey markets, and that strategy on the NHL's part has gone pretty well in a lot of places. Tampa, South Florida, Vegas, a lot of Stanley Cups there, Nashville, Carolina, Dallas, to name a few. It did fail, however, in Phoenix, where the Jets went. That area lost its team to Utah as of this season. The strategy also failed in Atlanta, and so the Atlanta Thrashers moved to Winnipeg in 2011, reuniting a hockey-mad city with the NHL and giving the team the name the Jets once again. It was a different franchise than the one that had previously been called the Jets, but the Winnipeg Jets were rebirthed, returned to Winnipeg in 2011, and from the jump, it was a love affair between Winnipeg and Jets 2.0. Times were lean for a while. The Jets did not even get a cursory first-round bouncing from the playoffs until their 5th year in town, but they played to a packed arena, the smallest one in the NHL, holding just over 15,000 fans, and gradually the team got better, a lot better. Winnipeg made the Western Conference Finals in 2018 and has missed the playoffs exactly 1 time since then. This year, things have gone to a new level, though. As Ben just so eloquently stated, the Jets have started 15-1 and then 15-3 under first-year coach Scott Arniel. They've got the best record in hockey. They've got one of the best goalies in recent history, Connor Hellebuck, backstopping a good, deep team that has so far mostly overwhelmed the rest of the NHL. It is also possible, though we will see, that this Jets team is saving hockey in Winnipeg. Because coming into this season, the business vibes around Jets 2.0 were not very good. Last season, as the Jets had a down year on the ice, they played to an average crowd of just 90% of capacity, 3rd lowest in the NHL, and had the lowest attendance in the league overall of any team that wasn't playing in a college hockey arena. That was the former Jets, the Coyotes, who were in their last year in the desert. Ownership and the NHL were flashing bright red warning signs about the Jets. The team went out of its way to tell The Athletic that it had suffered a 27% decline in season tickets in just 3 years. Jets chairman Mark Chipman, who runs the team through his company True North Sports and Entertainment, made it sound like Winnipeg would again lose its team if its fans did not buy more tickets. Quote, "I wouldn't be honest with you if I didn't say we've got to get back to 13,000. That's season tickets. This place we find ourselves in right now, it's not going to work over the long haul. It just isn't." The Jets don't have a ton of local corporate sponsors, so they've been clear that they really have to sell tickets. And NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman has been clear about it too, reiterating that the league is committed to Winnipeg, but that seriously, guys, you really have to buy more tickets to help out the Winnipeg Jets and keep them here. I find this a little bit untoward. I think if you're going to threaten a fan base so explicitly or even implicitly with losing a team yet again, you should explain why a drop in season ticket sales makes it unpalatable for you as a business to keep the team in place. But the Jets offered more transparency than most professional franchises would, and so far, it seems like a bit of progress is being made. Season ticket sales this season have ticked upward from about 9,500 to about 10,000, according to Front Office Sports. The NHL's deputy commissioner, Bill Daly, told the outlet that the team was pleased with its growth, but the Jets are still just playing to about 90% of capacity, according to data from Sports Reference. That's a tick better than last year, but still near the bottom of the league. They've pulled ahead at least of the miserable San Jose Sharks in total attendance, narrowly. They are also technically ahead of the relocated Coyotes, who are now in Utah, but that's because the relocated Coyotes are playing in a basketball arena where many of the seats are obstructed view, and thus do not count towards the official figure. Meanwhile, on the ice, the Jets have just kept winning and winning and winning, and it is a fascinating season, both because NHL teams rarely start this well, and because of what is at stake. The Jets have never, in any of their incarnations, won a Stanley Cup, and it is a great indignity and a great sadness to lose a team twice. Montreal, Quebec City, Atlanta have all learned what it's like to lose a hockey team twice. Not fun if you're a hockey fan in those cities. This has created an unusual situation where a hockey team is somewhat explicitly threatening that it might skip town yet again unless more people buy tickets to its games. At the same time, it's making the best case possible for why you should buy tickets, because it's winning a ton. And it does make one wonder if wins and losses are really the key to ticket sales, or if people will buy hockey tickets when they think they're doing well economically, and they aren't worried about inflation, or they aren't worried about prices of everyday goods, or they're in a media market with more people than there are in Winnipeg, Manitoba. The Jets host the defending Stanley Cup champs, the Florida Panthers, on Tuesday night, and right now you can get in for about $40 plus fees via StubHub. So I ask, anyone want to go to Manitoba? I looked, and there are no direct flights from either New York City or North Carolina, where you both live, but a layover the week before Thanksgiving could be fun.
Ooh, I'm a dual U.S.-Canadian citizen, thanks to my Canadian dad, but I believe I've never been to Manitoba, so this might be my chance. By the way, I learned that the original Winnipeg Jets were named after the New York Jets because Ben Hatskin, the owner of the original Winnipeg Jets, was supposedly a big New York Jets fan back in Broadway Joe's heyday. So it's nice that the current Winnipeg Jets are doing their best to bring honor back to the name the New York Jets are sullying.
Yeah, I was about to say I'd much rather go to Winnipeg to watch that Jets game than go to New York City to watch a New York Jets game. Absolutely, any day of the week. And I love that we have more Ben Lindbergh lore. Very much enjoyed that.
Just renewed my passport, just in case.
Go Jets. We hope it works out well in Winnipeg. That is all for this episode. We've also got a bonus show that is live right now about the situation in the National Basketball Association where three-pointers are raining down like hellfire upon defenses all across the league. To hear that, you can subscribe to Slate Plus on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangup plus to get access wherever you listen. The episode is available right now, and we will see you over there. Our show notes are at slate.com/hangup, and you can email us at hangup@slate.com. Don't forget to follow the show and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Our producer is Kevin Bendis. For Ben Lindbergh and Lindsay Gibbs, I am Alex Kirshner. Remember Zelma Beatty, and thank you for listening.
Breaking news, and this one is almost unbelievable.
Yeah, it's all about new customers at Bet365 because they get $150 in bonus bets when they bet $5. And even better, bonus bets can be used on the spread, totals, and player props.
There you have it. Bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets. And see why. It's never ordinary at Bet365. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 21 plus only. Must be physically located in Virginia. Terms and conditions apply.